Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this event. My name's Rhiannon Moylan. I'm a planner at Montague Evans and chair of the Scottish Young Planners Network. Today, we're going to be hearing from Sean. Sean is the current vice chair of the Scottish Young Planners Network and will be taking over the chair role in 2021. He's a chartered urban planner and currently works at Glasgow City Council within the City Development Plan team and focuses on the city's recently adopted open space strategy. Sean has participated in both England and Scotland and has worked in both the public and private sectors. Today, he's going to talk a bit about his current project on nature-based solutions and what they could mean for planners across the UK. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Rhiannon. So my name's Sean Kelly. I'm the Senior Project Officer on Glasgow's Connecting Nature project, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a little second. Today I'm going to run through a presentation which will take about 20 minutes or so, and then hopefully we'll have some time after that for some questions. First of all, I'll introduce Connecting Nature and Glasgow's open space strategy. We'll have a look at nature-based solutions and the definitions around that. And then we'll go on to have a look at a nature-based solution framework which is being developed by the Connecting Nature group. Then we'll look at some of the key components of that framework, and then we'll have a little look at the WellBeing Economy and how that relates to this framework for nature-based solutions and the work that we're doing in Glasgow. And then hopefully we'll lead on to some more discussion. So my experience so far comes largely from a development management background, although I have dabbled a bit in transport planning and regeneration, and I'm now working in open space policy making. I have practiced in the southeast of England and in Scotland. For me, it's important to try and get a broad perspective as possible on urban planning issues, and I focused on development issues in the global south in my masters and did some work in Brazil. And now I work with Connecting Nature and our partners across Europe and the Caucasus and beyond that, actually. So a brief background on Connecting Nature. It's a European Commission Horizon 2020 project. Glasgow is the front runner city. In Glasgow, we're a team of 3.5, sort of. There's 3 officers, and we have a lead officer who is our manager. We sit within the development plan team, and we work with our partners, Green Space Scotland, who you may have heard of, and a network of other academic experts and researchers. Our exemplar project in Glasgow is the city's open space strategy and an accompanying delivering mapping tool, which is currently being developed. The open space strategy was in production for a number of years and was formally adopted back in February before the whole world changed. It is a cross-service and cross-organisation tool and comprises a background policy document, a static open space map, and soon to also include the delivery plan, which is an interactive mapping tool. When further developed, open space strategy delivery plan mapping tool will be a sophisticated interactive spatial tool to help inform open spaces, make it easier to protect and enhance open spaces, and ultimately allow nature-based solutions to upscale and develop in the most suitable locations across the city. In addition, the Glasgow Connecting Nature team are also adding value by monitoring a suite of indicators, supporting site-level demonstrator projects, and are developing a strategy around innovative finance models and entrepreneurship for nature-based enterprises. I just realised that my slide is skipping forward a little bit, so I'll try to speed up a bit. So what are nature-based solutions? I find people have different levels of understanding, which I suppose is to be expected with an emerging term. So here we'll take a brief look at some of the most up-to-date definitions. This is the working definition of the European Commission, and that defines nature-based solutions to societal changes as solutions that are inspired and supported by nature, which are cost-effective, simultaneously provide environmental, social and economic benefits and help build resilience. Last year, this was updated to be more in line with the IUCN definition to include more emphasis on biodiversity and well-being. So in 2019, it was updated to include nature-based solutions, therefore provide multiple benefits for biodiversity. Any approaches that do not improve biodiversity, are not based or delivering on a range of ecosystem services, are not nature-based solutions. So I would argue that the term nature-based solutions goes beyond traditional descriptions in planning, such as green infrastructure, but important to remember that these definitions are still being researched and are still evolving. There are now several NBS typologies defined within the literature. In Connecting Nature, we often refer to this typology, which is the Egremont et al. Typology from 2015. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these, but type 1 is basically providing better use of existing natural environments. And the example given there is of protected marine environments. Type 2 is making better use of existing managed environments, and the example given there is about innovative ways of planning agricultural landscapes. And type 3, which is our main focus in connecting nature, is the design and management of new ecosystem environments, such as green roofs, natural, sustainable urban drainage systems, community gardens, etc., that are mostly found in urban environments. So in a nutshell, our work is about renaturing urban areas. And with that in mind, in the wider Connected Nature group, we've been developing a framework for planning and upscaling urban nature-based solutions. And it is this framework that will be the basis of my presentation today. So this is the framework. I'm going to try not get too bogged down with this diagram, as it is still a work in progress to a degree. And personally, I'm never really sure how helpful degrees like this are to practitioners. But that said, I do think this does do a good job of capturing the key components required for successfully upscaling urban nature-based solutions. Some may be obvious, others not so, but it's fair to say that each component is based on a wide body of work and research. So now we'll take a brief look at the framework before moving on to look more closely at the components perhaps most relevant to urban planning by discussing some examples from both the UK and internationally. So tech solutions, these could be a piece of infrastructure or a database solution. We'll look at this in more detail shortly. Governance, robust and agreed mechanisms for both setup and long-term stewardship of nature-based solutions is the focus here in the framework. Financing business models and nature-based enterprises, obviously fairly self-explanatory. I'll talk about nature-based enterprises a bit later. Co-production, another one we'll look at later, but methods that involve shared responsibility, and again, reflexive monitoring, which is a method for dynamic learning and problem solving, and also in our experience in Glasgow, actually quite a good way of silo breaking. And impact assessment, this is crucial in order to monitor the impact of nature-based solutions over a course of time. Again, very important for building an evidence base, particularly for funding applications. So there is a lot involved, and we don't have time today to go through all of these in detail, you might be glad to hear. But what does the framework mean in reality for built environment professionals? We'll now take a closer look at technical solutions, co-production, and the financing, business models, and nature-based enterprises. So technical solutions, as just mentioned, can refer to database IT solutions or on-site green infrastructure solutions. In Glasgow, our developing open space strategy delivery plan mapping tool that I mentioned before is an example of an IT-based tech solution and has been developed by our Connected Nature GIS specialist, Rania Sermpezi. The screenshot here to the left is of our dashboard prototype, which is where we use the data we collect, such as water management, air quality, biodiversity, health, deprivation, and a whole range of other information to analyse open spaces across the city to help inform the best use of those spaces. While still very much in production, this is a good example of designing a tool that can help inform the planning and implementation of nature-based solutions at a city scale, especially in the growing era of smart cities. On the right, we have images of a nature-based solution project currently in the planning phase in the Drum Chapel area of Glasgow called Grow Chapel. This is a site-scale nature-based solution project which aims to solve an antisocial behavioural issue where the technical solution is designing and creating a community growing garden and community space. Projects at this scale also need to consider framework components such as governance, co-production, and finance. In the longer term, the aim is that the dashboard will be sophisticated enough to automatically and strategically identify suitable locations on the open space map for projects such as Grow Chapel here, in consideration of other potential land uses. This should help to reduce the sometimes ad hoc processes experienced by communities at the moment. Now on to some co-production methods. The first one we'll talk about is the Sarajevo process. Again, a pilot. It's a co-creative art-based engagement approach with a focus on health and well-being. It's been developed by Connected Nature partners in Trinity College Dublin and University of East London in collaboration with the city of Sarajevo, who are one of our partner cities in the project. The process draws on our memories, places us in nature, and captures our embodied experience, help us to tell stories with and within nature. It is envisaged that the final version of the Sarajevo process pilot will enable key stakeholders in cities to tell the story of nature and nature-based solutions in their cities, engage with citizens to tell their stories, and to use these stories to help frame the co-creation process of nature-based solutions, design nature-based solutions to address a particular challenge in the city, and in this context, one element of the process is helping stakeholders identify the goals, priorities of their nature-based solutions. These can then be fed into the connected nature process and help establish indicators, selecting technical solutions, and support both the co-creative and reflexive monitoring elements of the framework that I discussed before. And then back to Glasgow for perhaps a more traditional example of co-production. A number of charities and local community organisations have successfully produced a growing demonstrator garden within the previously unused walled gardens in Hastings Park, which some of you might be familiar with. The garden has been in operation for around 5 years and is a good example of cross-organisation co-production, both at management level, where groups work together to ensure the long-term sustainability and organisation of the site, but also at an operational level where individuals, sometimes vulnerable individuals, work together to produce well-kept growing plots. We're looking at this model to help inform the governance within the Grow Chapel project that I mentioned earlier. Oh, and just for reference, some of you may be familiar with Armstein's ladder from 1969. That's an old one, but was actually all just brought to my attention fairly recently. I think it's still very relevant today, and it highlights the different levels of engagement and co-production. So I think it's still a valuable tool for planners in particular to refer to. So now, before we go on to look at the final finance and enterprise elements of the framework, I just wanted to briefly bring up some of the fast emerging wellbeing economy discourse that's about at the moment. This quote is taken from Catherine Trebeck and Jeremy Williams' recent book, The Economics of Arrival. Meister's metaphorical plane turns out to be like no other because he never allows it to land, but leaves it flying forever into the sunset of mass consumerism. So here she's basically challenging a particular mid-20th century economic discourse which described the status of economic growth somewhat ironically using an airplane metaphor. She challenges this because this thinking very much appears to still be reinforcing our obsession with GDP today. And it begs the question, can we land? Do we need to fly all the time? Especially in relation to the huge societal and environmental impacts that we are creating. Also worth mentioning here that Scotland and Wales are now 2 UK nations who are part of the WellBeing Economic Alliance, which is a collaboration of organisations, alliances, movements, and individuals working towards the well-being economy and delivering human and ecological well-being. And so this further helps to highlight the potential shift in economic thinking and the links with nature. So what's your point, Colour, you may ask? Well, to me, and granted I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, but these links might be worth highlighting because there could be a direct relationship between a more socially and environmentally friendly economy that doesn't always favour growth at all cost approach, especially if planners and planning can work to influence a different approach to economic development with a focus on green entrepreneurship and enterprise and setting the scene for more diverse business modelling. So next, we're going to look at some examples emerging from Connecting Nature project in this area. So like with most elements of the framework, these elements are still in progress. The project doesn't finish until 2022, and obviously we hope the learning goes way beyond that. So these elements are still in progress, but we do have some great examples emerging from some of our cities. In relation to enterprise and entrepreneurship, our fellow frontrunner city is the city of Genk has developed a strategy that focuses on making best use of natural resources within their geographic location within the Sligo Valley in the city of Genk. The scheme, whilst at a relatively early stage, involves a bespoke support package being arranged between entrepreneurial citizens who wish to develop a business idea. So far, these pilot deals have been received well amongst the community, and the team have emphasised the importance of branding and communication. And interestingly, products so far include honey, hops, and ice cream. Can't wait to visit. Incidentally, by the way, we are currently developing a green entrepreneur business incubator program in Glasgow as part of our successful Stall Spaces project. It's just a development stage just now, but worth looking out for later in 2021. So in relation to business modelling, we have helped our colleagues at Trinity College Dublin to develop a nature-based canvas, which is a modified version of the traditional business model canvas. We've used this tool in Glasgow back in February for the first time with a range of stakeholders, including community groups and citizens. It was actually for the Grow Chapel project that I mentioned earlier, and although the nature-based canvas has been used in different contexts, this was the first time that it was actually used in a community setting. It was considered a success, and although outputs have been delayed because of the pandemic, the session allowed us to take a deep look at many issues, including what sort of suitable business models might work for such a project. We looked at hybrid models that could include an element of social enterprise as well as areas for profit. We've recently been able to reconvene the project steering group, which has been a good step forward, and now we plan to take these actions forward. And one final thing to mention here is our recently launched nature-based enterprise platform. Now, what is a nature-based enterprise and what is the platform for? Well, in a nutshell, a nature-based enterprise is an organisation that could be for or not for profit, that is involved in nature to some degree as part of their business offer or day-to-day activities. So this could be a landscape architect or a community growing group, for example. The platform allows these groups to engage in relevant online community spaces, but also offers a marketplace for enterprises to win potential business opportunities. So I encourage you all to take a look and sign up if it's relevant to you, or to share with contacts if it's not. And afterwards, I'm happy to share any relevant links for this or answer any other questions on it. So I wanted to use my almost final slide to attempt to tie all this together in terms of what a nature-based solution approach could mean for planning and for planners across the UK and beyond. Well, in my view, it could result in truly co-produced work and environments with far more shared responsibility between councils, consultants, and crucially, citizens. With buy-in from professionals and citizens alike, and with political will, these approaches might mean that we see more diverse and carbon-friendly economic activity suited to local conditions. For example, many places might not need to grow economically. We might see more robust governance around policy making if we can agree consistent structures. We will hopefully see greener and more biodiversity-friendly development proposals resulting in even smarter cities. And we also might see better monitoring, measuring and learning of policies, plans and developments in the past. And in Scotland, planning performance frameworks are a great start for this. Of course, we also need to recognise that there is a lot of good work going on and has been for quite a long time. We're already seeing a change in Scotland, in particular with the broad consultation responses to the upcoming National Planning Framework 4 and the new Planning Act, which requires all local authorities to produce open space strategies and local place plans and way more beyond this. In England, big changes are afoot too, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, and this also brings opportunities. But we can't ignore that there obviously are issues to overcome, such as unfamiliar terminologies, which incidentally don't always translate well into other languages, and this is problematic, and it was actually the topic of discussion I had with some academics yesterday from different parts of the world. There's also some technical and resourcing barriers and a serious but potentially hidden danger lurking in the background, which is the risk of entrenching the commodification of nature. Too much to go into today on that, but it is something that we need to be aware of. But if we do get it right, I think that planners could take their position at the forefront of a new well-being and nature-based economy and really lead the post-COVID green revolution recovery. And before ending, I'd probably get a ticking off. We didn't mention our upcoming Innovation Summit taking place next year. It's free and you can sign up at the Connected Nature website. And you can also follow us on Twitter. Details are there for all other project updates. And just one final slide. I thought I would end on a slightly controversial note by asking, is it all pie in the sky? Obviously, I don't think so. But what do you think? Thank you very much for listening, everyone, and I'm happy to discuss.
Thanks very much, Sean. That was a really, really interesting presentation. We actually had 100 people tuned in at one point, which is a record for Scottish Young Planners Networking. Definitely goes to show just how much interest there is in nature-based solutions. I'd take the opportunity just to remind everyone, if anyone's got any questions, to pop them into the question function. We've had a couple come through just now, so I'll just put you on the spot there, Sean. So the first question, what makes a community garden a nature-based solution and not just a community garden?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. As I was saying before, nature-based solutions are still technically being defined in the literature. But my answer to that would be that, going back to the original definitions from the EU and the recent update, is that there needs to be a focus on biodiversity as well as a focus on environmental, social, and other environmental factors. So if you're designing a community garden, I think in order for it to be a true nature-based solution, you should think about things like what species you're going to use, whether or not you're in an area that could benefit from connecting habitats and pollinators and so on. So it's just about more careful thinking, I think, on that, Rhiannon, about how you design it and making sure that biodiversity is something that you are definitely considering.
So could it be that people are finding nature-based solutions without even knowing it?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, nature-based solutions in some way, I think, are, it's a new term, but it's describing things that have already been there in many ways. There's a lot of thinking and research going behind this to make sure that there is a focus on making sure that we realize all the benefits. But yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier on in my presentation, that in planning, I've been used to referring to green infrastructure to describe these sorts of things. But I think that the focus needs to be on the kind of environmental justice side of things more than it is.
Great. So the next question, could you say more about reflexive monitoring?
Oh, yeah. Reflexive monitoring is a term that I was absolutely not familiar with before I started on this project. And I think probably most planners probably have that same view as well. Largely, it's an academic process, and it's a way to learn on the job, I suppose. So a dynamic way of problem solving is how I'd describe it in a bit of a nutshell. In Glasgow, we have set up a process with our partners at Drift University, where we've kind of simplified it down a little bit so that we are able to use it to work cross-service. We bring a number of people in, different officers from different teams, to talk to us on a regular basis about particular issues or critical turning points as we talk about them, and how we might overcome those. So it's actually quite a good method to use once you get your head around it. If you are working on a project, not just like this, but actually on any project, you can adapt it. So I'd recommend people to have a look into that. We have got a reflexive monitoring guidebook, which I'm happy to share with anyone afterwards. I can share links afterwards to go into the detail on the process a bit more. But yeah, so in a nutshell, it's basically a dynamic way of problem solving on the job with various relevant stakeholders. So yeah, I'd recommend it now that I've gone through the nightmare of learning how to use it.
That's great. Thanks, Sean. So another question, how have elected reps responded to the concept? Is there an opportunity to integrate nature-based solutions with the wider wellbeing economy objectives promoted by the Scottish Government?
Well, the first part of the question, elected members in Glasgow, we're starting to make a lot of headway with that now. People will be familiar with the kind of the green revolution agenda that's emerging at the moment, particularly post-COVID, actually. And I think that's pushing things like nature-based solutions, the concept of nature-based solutions, more into the mainstream, which is really good, because it means that we can get the attention then of our elected members, and my manager Gillian's quite good at that. So we're now starting to get them on board, but we are at the beginning of that process. Obviously, with Glasgow hosting COP26 next year, we hope that that will further push the concept into the mainstream and get political support and buy-in. So a work in progress, I would say, with elected members. Other cities actually have maybe a bit more advanced stage when it comes to that. For example, our fellow front-runner city, Genk, which I mentioned, their entrepreneurial Cymer Deal project. Genk municipality is much smaller than Glasgow, and they actually have a direct line to their relevant mayor and elected members, so they've been able to make quite a lot of progress. We have a different setup in Glasgow, so we have different challenges to face, but we are definitely getting there. And the other point was on the well-being economy, is that right? Just remind me what the point was.
Is there an opportunity to integrate nature-based solutions with the wider well-being economy WellBeing Economy objectives promoted by the Scottish Government?
Well, absolutely yes, is what my answer to that question is. And that was one of my main points in the presentation, actually, is that I think now is the time to do that. We've been developing the national planning framework for, as you know, Rhiannon, and having looked to some of the consultation responses that were put together recently on the events that were held just before lockdown, it looks like nature-based solutions have definitely made it into the responses there. So that moves up the agenda to a national level. There are obviously other organisations who are talking about nature-based solutions. We're not unique here. Nature's Scot, for example. So it's about making that connection. And I think with Scotland being part of the WellBeing Economic Alliance is a great in, if you like. So I think if we can raise this up the agenda at a national level, someday way above my pay grade, hopefully we'll make that connection between the two so that we can do it hand in hand. So I don't have all the answers to that question yet, but it is a good point, actually. I think doing things like this helps to raise awareness, at least. So hopefully there'll be people on the call that will be listening intently.
Great, thanks, Sean. So another question, could you expand on what the connections are with Glasgow City Council's capital programme and any links to open space improvements and nature-based solutions? That's specifically looking at, is there any criteria that ascribes investment related to supporting nature-based solutions?
Well, in relation to capital budgets, I mean, I don't have responsibility for capital budgets, thankfully. But I guess the open space strategy and the delivery plan mapping tool that we are producing alongside that, part of Connecting Nature, would be a tool by which we'll be able to identify locations for potential capital related projects that will be funded through the capital budget. So, you know, we're quite, well, we've got the dashboard prototype developed and we've got the system developed, but we're still at a stage where collecting data can be problematic and patchy, and Rania has a really tough time with that. We've developed a way to coordinate a response around that, but we're, you know, still at a fairly early stage with it. But once we get to that point, and we're at a point where the delivery plan can produce meaningful results, then I hope that we'll be able to bring in chat around capital investment and what that means for Glasgow's open spaces. One of the things that we've just done, my other colleague, Laura Mowat, I don't know if Laura's on the call, she's a project officer on the project as well, and she's just led a wide-scale assessment of potential community spaces in Glasgow. There was almost 400, so she led a team of us out doing assessments on them using a matrix that we developed. And one of the points of that was to identify potential community spaces where investment should be targeted in order to improve them, to make them more multifunctional and just better quality community spaces across the city. So we've just almost completed the on-site assessment for that, and then the next stage is to use the dashboard to bring in all the other data sources that we've got to work out some intelligent solutions around that, and various other things as well. So I maybe haven't answered that question fully. It was a bit of a complex one, but you know what? I'm more than happy to take up any questions later. I can give out my email address and we can discuss afterwards.
Perfect. Another question coming through is asking if students or residents in Glasgow want to engage and help with nature-based solutions through your project, how should they get in touch and offer help? How do they find out more?
Well, we have got our own web page as part of Glasgow City Council's web pages, and again, I can share that. The wider Connecting Nature website is also available, which is a huge range of resources now, actually, including the guidebook that I mentioned earlier for reflexive monitoring and other guidebooks too. In terms of engaging with the open space strategy work that we're doing, obviously the pandemic has made us stop and think a little bit about what sort of engagement we need to do. And in line with what I was just saying there about the development of the mapping tool that we're doing, we will be going out to consult with a whole variety of stakeholders on what these initial results are saying about how we use open spaces in Glasgow, particularly in relation to community spaces. So I'd be keen to engage with, you know, all parts of society on that. We are currently working on developing an engagement strategy, and we're hoping to start implementing that kind of spring next year. One of the things that I mentioned in my presentation there was the Sarajevo process, and that might be something that we look at doing in Glasgow too, which is like a body mapping process. It's something different. And yeah, so maybe keep an eye out for that too. But yeah, so you can follow us on Twitter, Nature NBS, me, Sean UC, and there's also a website, and I can share those details afterwards.
Great, so loads of opportunities to get in touch.
Yeah,
another question came in about biodiversity offsetting and what other options are available rather than just the kind of ground up approach. So if you want to integrate nature-based connections, what are your options? Obviously there's the kind of wholesale start from the beginning, but what smaller measures are there as well to offset biodiversity offsetting?
Well, I mean, first of all, I have to say I'm not an ecologist and I'm not a biodiversity expert, but I have been learning little tricks as I've went on in this project. And I guess it depends on how green fingered you are, for example. There's a range of resources available on the Connecting Nature website and other websites too, which can describe what small steps you can take to, for example, provide good habitats for pollinators, because they're really important. So if you've got a garden or a balcony or even a window ledge, you can actually help form part of a habitat network. One of the things that the open space delivery plan will do is identify where those locations in the city best are. And actually Glasgow and Clyde Valley Green Network Trust, I think they may have updated their name recently, so apologies if I've got that wrong, have done actually a habitat network research, and that's available on their website. So if you are interested on knowing where you live and what sort of impact you can make to habitat networks, I'd recommend having a look at their website. Green Action Trust it is actually, because there's some detailed information there, and that will help to inform our open space data in Glasgow, but they look beyond the city of Glasgow boundaries actually. So if you're not from Glasgow, then you might find that more helpful. But yeah, there's lots of different things you can do, small things. But yeah, I'm not that's an expert. Even in my house, actually, I have to admit, I'm not the green fingered person. So yeah, I've got a lot to learn in that department, to be honest.
I can agree. I have a rather dead window box sitting. So another questions came through asking if it's brownfield sites that will be prioritised for nature-based solution developments.
Well, in many ways there will be, yeah. We hope to bring in brownfield sites, and as a lot of people will know, Glasgow has a lot of vacant and dirt land, which includes brownfield sites as well, and they are a priority. So yeah, that's something that we're looking at, particularly in relation to these community spaces that we're talking about and better uses for them and directing investment. In Glasgow, we also have our stalled spaces project, which aims to bring back stalled spaces that could be brownfield sites across the city into use, albeit on a temporary basis, so that people can get better use out of them. I mean, the impact of vacant and dirt land and brownfield sites on people's health and well-being is well researched and documented now, and I think planners are learning that there's a lot that we could be doing and are doing actually to try and improve that situation. Some cities face that challenge more than others. Glasgow is obviously a bigger issue in Glasgow being a post-industrial city, and there's a whole variety of different measures that are currently being undertaken to try and address the issue. But it's a big task, no doubt about it. And it definitely, it's one of the main things that the open space strategy hopes to try and achieve in the future. I mean, the strategy worth saying is up until 2050. So we're working to a fairly long timescale here, which sometimes unfortunately has to be the case. But yeah, it's a key topic.
Great. I just encourage everyone to keep sending their questions through. We've got a couple more to go through, and if there's nothing else after that, we can round up. But do take the time to ask Sean questions while he's here. So our next question, this is quite a big one. What do you hope the legacy of connecting nature will be in Glasgow, Scotland, wider to the UK?
Oh, that is a big question. Well, ultimately, what I hope the legacy will be, certainly in the shorter term or the immediate term, will be that Glasgow has a formal open space team who are looking at these issues on a full-time basis. At the moment, as I said, there's 3 officers from Connecting Nature, led by Gillian, who also contributes. and then there's another open space officer and another manager. So there's 6 of us at the moment who are working in a kind of informal sort of basis. We work well together, but we're not a formal team. And I hope that in the future we win the argument on it, and that elected members and senior management and Glasgow City Council see the benefit of this, and realise that actually having an open space team is essential actually to making sure that we can embed nature-based solution practices and the framework elements that I just discussed into everyday working and lives for practitioners. So that would be my immediate legacy that I would hope. I mean, beyond that, I think what we want to see is more nature in cities, really, and we want to see a less engineered, man-made approach to things as much as possible. It's not always possible. We have to have a balance. So, yeah, I suppose greener cities. We all want to see that, don't we? It's the kind of dream, I suppose, at the moment. So, yeah, that's as best as I can answer that question. I think I probably should have given that a bit more thought.
That's great, Sean. And I think it's really important as well, the links that you've mentioned between nature-based solutions and the impacts on economy and health and well-being, and it really is very wide-reaching. So if no one else has anything else, I have a last question, which is just, can you recommend any further reading resources or anywhere else where you could learn more on this?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned some before. I think a good starting point would be Connecting Nature's own website. So I think that's connectingnature.eu, I think, but I can confirm that afterwards. If people are happy, then I can send on some reading or some resources to people to read up on this. Yeah, there's loads of things out there, to be honest, but I would, as a starting point, start at the Connecting Nature website. Obviously, I would say that, but it is a good resource, and we work hard with our academics to produce these guidebooks and other toolkits. Also, I probably should just plug our partner on Connecting Nature Glasgow, who are Green Space Scotland, and some of you will be familiar with them and their work. They have a brilliant website with a lot of different tools and advice and guidebooks as well in various aspects, but probably worth actually signing up to their newsletter, which comes out once a month. And you can do that quite easily just by going to their website and popping in your details, and that way you'll get up-to-date information from across Scotland anyway. We probably have got people from down south as well. Sorry, I feel like I've maybe neglected them a little bit. I've forgotten all about my years in the southeast.
Actually, a question has came through on that, asking if there's an equivalent in England of what you're doing up here in Glasgow.
Well, there's other Horizon 2020 projects looking at similar subjects in England. There's the Go Green project in Manchester. There's also one in London as well, which I forget the name of now. But actually, it's worth just Googling that. If you just Googled Horizon 2020 projects, London or England, you'll get a whole variety of things coming up. I don't know off the top of my head at the moment, so sorry I can't answer that question fully. But there are definitely ones. Or Nature-Based Solutions London. One of the things actually in London to look out for, be aware of, is the National Park City organisation, which is a wider campaign which was endorsed by the Mayor of London last year. And that's basically a campaign that seeks to improve open spaces and community spaces and greening projects and all that in the City of London. And incidentally, worth also noting that we are currently working with the National Park City campaign to develop the same idea across Glasgow as well. So that's something to look out for, and probably a good starting point for people who are in the southeast anyway to take a look at these sorts of issues in their area.
Great, thanks, Sean. We've had one more question, just wondering whether or not the ward-based health stats or GP stats have been overlaid on top of the open space network mapping that you've been done, just to, I suppose, just to see if there's any correlation there and if that level of analysis has been done at this stage.
I can't comment on whether that exact data set has been included, but I do know that we do include health data for sure. If Rania was here, I'd be able to clarify that, but Rania really is our data expert and is collecting the data. We do have a whole range of health data, and I mean, there are issues actually with data collection. I'm sure other people on the call may be familiar with these, but things like collecting data per ward, or what other boundaries do we look at when we're collecting this sort of data, and what's available, what can be shared. We do have data from health in Glasgow to quite a low level. It might even be postcode level potentially. So yes, we do have that information, and yes, of course, it is included as part of our open space mapping, because it's one of the key things that we need to look at when advising what open spaces should be doing in the future. Obviously, we want to make sure that those who need to have high quality open spaces and benefit from it the most can have access to them. So health data is really important. I'm just not quite sure on the level by which we collect the data. It could be more, but it could be more than that.
That's great, Sean. Thanks very much for your time today. I think we're going to round it off here. That's the last of the questions that came through answered. Hopefully, if anyone's got any last minute questions, just contact Sean. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer them. But before you go, Sean, I have one quick question. What's your favourite thing about your role, and how do you think you are helping to influence the world in terms of nature-based solutions?
Ooh. My favourite thing about my current role is that we get to work with cities from mainly across Europe, but actually across the world as well. And I really love that element. I think I said at the beginning of my presentation that I've always tried to keep as broad a perspective as possible on planning, which is quite difficult in the UK, because you tend to work within a policy framework that isn't necessarily adaptable across different nations. So different countries have different planning systems or don't have a planning system altogether. I've been really lucky, and I've worked on projects and focused my study on international issues and learned a lot from that. So I would say that the main benefit for me is that learning aspect. We are currently learning from a number of our fast follower cities, including Malaga in Spain, A Coruña in Spain, and Sarajevo that we mentioned before. And there's so much good working on these places that we need to learn from. So it's a kind of a shared learning experience. I really do enjoy that aspect of it. What was the other part of your question, Gannon? Did I miss something?
Yeah, just how you think you're going to influence, how this project is going to influence the world, and what your mark's going to be. As a fellow young planner, what are your big ambitions?
Okay, well, as a fellow young planner, I have played a very, very small part in developing some of these ideas and concepts as part of the as part of the Connecting Nature project. And you know, the Horizon 2020 project is about research and development, and there is room for experimentation, which is what we get to do on this project. I also love that aspect of it as well, by the way. But the learning that comes out of these projects is what we hope will influence policymakers in the future, not just in the UK, but obviously beyond that. So I think hopefully in some way I'll play a very, very, very small role in influencing policymakers in the area of nature-based solutions in the future, and also actually with helping define the term nature-based solutions too. I think I said at the beginning that it's one of the issues actually is that it's an emerging concept, and most people don't have an understanding of it. To be honest, I'm not getting my head around it sometimes. So yeah, it's an emerging concept, and I hope that what we're doing in Glasgow is influencing the overall definition of nature-based solutions and how we use them in planning. And obviously not just me, but the team in Glasgow that I work with as well. So yeah, hopefully a big influence in a small way, or a small influence in a big way.
That's great. Thanks again, Sean. Thanks for your time, and thanks to everyone for tuning in this afternoon. Have a great evening.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.